turn our attention now to supply. So the areas that we're going to be covering are: what is supply, what is the quantity supplied, the law of supply, individual supply, market supply, and the difference between a change in quantity supplied and a change in supply. So first, let me give you the definition of supply. Supply is the relationship between the price of a product or service and the quantity or amount of that good or service that will be put out into the market by sellers. Okay. So quantity supplied is the amount of a good or service that a seller is willing and able to put into the market during a given price, at a given price, and during a specified period of time. So recall that we were talking about ice cream and my demand for ice cream, Josie's demand for ice cream, and the market demand for ice cream. So when we talk about supply, we have the same situation. We have how much a seller is willing to supply into the market at different prices. And if we add up all individual sellers together, we would have a market supply curve for how much ice cream they are willing to supply into the market at different price levels or price points. So here I have a supply schedule. So this is called a supply schedule. Just like we have a demand schedule, the supply schedule tells us price points and quantity supplied in the market. So here I'm taking our market supply curve, and we're noting that at a price of $1, quantity supplied is 0. That means if they're only going to get $1 for an ice cream cone, sellers are not willing to put that product in the market. They would rather use their resources somewhere else. If the price goes up to $2, the market supply is 4 ice cream cones. If the price goes up to $3, market supply is 6 ice cream cones. If the market supply price goes up to $4, market supply is 8 ice cream cones. So you can see as price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. As price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. This is what we call the law of supply. So we would say if price goes up, quantity supplied increases. If price goes down, quantity supplied decreases. And you can see that the two arrows are moving together, and we say that this is a direct relationship. Okay. We can graph the supply curve out as follows. We'll have our axes, 0 at the origin, price is on the y-axis, and quantity of ice cream cones is on the horizontal axis. So our price points go from 1 to 5. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, $6. And then on the x-axis, we're going to put the number of ice cream cones. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Okay, and now I can graph my supply curve. We graph the supply curve in a similar manner to graphing the demand curve. So our first points, and let's call this point A. Well, let's just go ahead and graph this out. So $1, 0 market supply. So at a price of $1, 0 ice creams will be supplied. At a price of $2, 4 ice cream cones. At a price of $3, 6 ice cream cones. At a price of $4, 8 ice cream cones. And at a price of $5, 10 ice cream cones. If we connect these dots, we have our supply curve. And you can see that as the price goes up, the quantity supplied increases. If the price goes down, the quantity supplied decreases. And we have movements along the curve, okay? So, if price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. If we go from $3 and 6 ice cream cones, and the price goes up to $4, we're going to have a movement up along the curve. If the price drops, quantity supplied will drop. And if we go from $3 to $2, we will be dropping from 6 ice cream cones to 4 ice cream cones. And that's called a movement along the curve. So it's important to remember, and this applies to both demand and supply, anytime there's a price change, you are going to have a change in the quantity supplied, and it is going to result in a movement along the curve. So that's an important thing to remember. Write that down in your notes and keep track of that. Okay, so we also have what we call changes in supply, or shifts of the supply curve. Just like we had shifts of the demand curve, we have shifts of the supply curve. And these are due to changes in some assumptions that govern the supply curve. So let me go ahead and put those assumptions on the board for you so that we can go through each one and you can see how those assumptions will cause either a leftward shift or a rightward shift. When we are looking at the supply curve, we have some key determinants, shifters, or assumptions that will cause our supply curve to either shift to the right. Again, when it shifts to the right, it means more, or shift to the left. When it shifts to the less, it means less. The easiest one to understand is number of suppliers or sellers. If we have more sellers of ice cream in the market, then our supply curve is going to shift to the right at every given price point. So instead of only having 4 ice cream cones at $2, if we have more suppliers, we may actually have 6 ice cream cones supplied at a price of $2. More entrants into the market to sell typically means that more is provided at specified price points. Alternatively, let's say ice cream shops have to close down. If they have to close down, that supply curve will shift to the left and there will be less ice cream supplied at a particular price point. So, under number of suppliers, if number of suppliers increases, we can say that the supply curve will shift to the right. If number of suppliers decreases, the supply curve shifts to the left. So that one's pretty easy to understand. The other shifter is productivity and technology. Productivity and technology have a lot to do with how much a supplier can produce in a given time period. If people are well trained and they have the proper equipment, then they can produce a lot. So if productivity and technology increase, supply will shift to the right. And of course, let's say a major piece of machinery breaks down, there's a technology glitch and the computers are down within a business and productivity drops, the supply of a product will shift to the left. So these are two things that will definitely impact the position of the supply curve. Price of inputs and taxes. Okay, so this is important. Businesses produce things. So if I'm going to produce ice cream, let's say I'm on the seller side now, selling ice cream, well, what are the inputs? The inputs are the butter fat used to make the ice cream, sugar, flavorings, perhaps the cone. Maybe I'm selling at the location, so I will need napkins. All these things are ingredients to making the ice cream cone, and not to mention wages that I have to pay my workers. If I have a location, I have to pay rent, I have to pay utilities, I have refrigerators that I need. all of those are input costs. And on top of that, taxes are costs as well. So if these input costs go up, what that means is that if I were initially selling ice cream at $2 and I had 4 ice creams that I was producing, when input costs and taxes go up, my supply curve is going to shift to the left. So let me take this old supply curve off. My supply curve will shift to the left, and that means that I will only be able to produce 1 ice cream cone because all of my costs went up. I can't buy as much ingredients as I could before and keep the price the same. Okay? So when input prices go up, supply shifts to the left, and when inputs and taxes go down, supply will shift to the right. So often part of a package to stimulate business, for example, will be to reduce taxes so supply can shift to the right, so businesses can produce more. You'll hear more about this later on. But definitely price of inputs and taxes will have an impact on the supply curve. We have 2 other related things: the price of related goods and substitutes in production, and complements in production. So these are not the same as in your demand curve. The ones in your demand curve are talking about substitutes in consumption as a demander, and complements in consumption or demand, things that you buy together. In this case, we're looking at substitutes in production. And what this means is a producer has a choice sometimes of what to produce. If you are in the ice cream business, maybe the trend is towards yogurt. You have the same equipment that you use for making ice cream. It can also be used perhaps for making yogurt or for making frozen custard. So the producer has a choice of what to produce and can substitute one product for the other and still sell it. I'm going to give you an example of substitutes in production between SUVs and trucks for an auto manufacturer. And I'll put that later on in the video. Complements in production means 2 things that are produced together. That means honey and apricots are produced together because bees are always located near orchards. The orchards need the bees to pollinate the flowers, and the bees need the flowers so that they can extract the pollen and make honey. So we have things that are made together. In the example I'm going to show you, it's the example of donuts and munchkins. So Dunkin' Donuts makes donuts, and then they cut the little hole out, and that little hole becomes a munchkin. Then finally, we have expectations. And producers have 2 types of expectations. One is about future prices, and the other one is about future input costs. Okay, so let me start with future input costs. Okay, this is kind of similar to the price of inputs and taxes. The difference is this word future. What do you think is going to happen in the future to the cost of your inputs? So if you think the cost of milk or butterfat, for example, is going to increase in the future, and your costs are going to go up, which means then that your profits will go down, you're going to try to sell as much as you can today to get the highest profit levels possible. So if you think that your future input costs are going to go up, your supply today is going to shift to the right. I'm going to sell as much as I can right now before my cost of production go up. Conversely, if you think your input costs are going to go down, then your supply today is going to be less because you're thinking, I'm going to be able to buy all these products to put into my ice cream at a real low cost next month. So I'm going to hold back on production and supply of ice cream today because it's going to be a lot cheaper for me to produce next month. So the supply today will shift to the left and there'll be less supply today. Okay, so this is a case of future input costs. So don't get it confused with the current price of inputs. Finally, future prices. Future prices has a big impact on supply. If you think you can get more dollars, or you can charge a higher price for that ice cream tomorrow, then you're not going to supply or sell a bunch today because you're going to get more tomorrow. So then the supply will shift to the right. If, however, you think future prices are going to go down tomorrow, then your supply today is going to shift to the left. Okay, so these are all the assumptions and shifters that will impact the supply curve. And I do have another video that I'm going to either insert or add on to this video talking in more detail about the price of related goods. Another supply curve shifter is price of related goods. Now, pay attention. Oh, not the same as in the demand curve. Okay, this is called a substitute in production will affect the supply curve. So what are substitutes in production? That means if you're going to make something, it's an either or. So let's say you have cake mix in your kitchen. You can make a cake out of it, or you can make cupcakes. So you have to decide which one are you going to make. Okay, so substitutes in production are going to determine the supply for a product. I like to start this discussion out talking about trucks and SUVs. And the reason I do this is because large auto manufacturers have the choice. Well, what should I produce? Is the trend trucks or is the trend SUVs? And based on that, they are going to allocate their resources towards the production of whichever product they think is the best in their own interest. So we're going to start with the supply curve for trucks and a supply curve for SUVs. Okay. Let's assume that a truck is selling for $30,000. And the car manufacturer maybe sells 100 of these. These numbers are all wrong, but you get the gist. Okay, let's assume that the SUV is selling for $30,000 and they're selling 100 SUVs. Now, for some reason, SUVs become very popular. And because they're so popular, there's increased demand, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. And the price goes up to $40,000. Okay. So if the price goes up, according to the law of supply, we know that the quantity supplied is going to increase as well. So they're going to produce more. But how can they produce more if they only have one facility in which to produce? Okay. So this is where I like to look at our production possibilities curve. Let's have trucks over here on the y-axis and SUVs on the x-axis. And when we started, they were producing 100 trucks and 100 SUVs. Well, if they want to produce more SUVs, because those are what's selling, that means that they have to take some of the resources away from trucks. They have to take people off this production line and put them onto the SUV production line. So they are going to be producing over here. And maybe now they're going to be producing 150 SUVs. what happens to the amount of trucks being produced? That's going to decrease. So when the price of a substitute in production goes up, as in the case of SUVs, the supply of the other product, meaning the trucks, is going to decrease. Why? Because the firm has to choose where to allocate its resources, and it's going to allocate its resources towards the product that gets it the highest dollar value. And then the supply curve will shift to the left when we talk about trucks. Of course, this goes in the other direction as well. Under the category of price of related goods, when we're talking about supply, is what we call complements in production. Complements in production are two things that are produced together, like donuts and donut holes. If you go to Dunkin' Donuts, you can get donuts and you can get munchkins. So the two of those are produced together. How so? They roll out the dough, they stamp the cookie, the dough with the donut cutter, and so the round part comes out, and that little piece in the middle is what becomes the munchkin. There are other things that are produced together. Gas and oil are produced together, shoes and beef are produced together. So those are called complements in production. There's always a byproduct. So what happens? Let's start with our supply curve for donuts and our supply curve for munchkins. Let's assume that for some reason, increase in demand for the donuts results in an increase in the price, causing a movement along the supply curve. So when the price of the donuts goes from $12 to $18, the donut shop is going to increase its production. Now, instead of 100 dozen donuts a day, they're producing 150 dozen donuts a day. Now, the natural byproduct of this, of course, is more munchkins. Okay, so how many more munchkins will there be? Well, if there's 50 more here, that means there's going to be 50 more over here. But note that nothing happened to the price of the munchkins. That stayed the same. So therefore, we have a shift of the supply curve, and we have more donuts being produced at the same price because of a change in the price of a complement in production. Okay? So we say that an increase in the price of a complement will cause a shift to the right of the other product. Okay. And of course, this would go in the other direction as well. If the price of donuts were to fall to $6 a dozen, well, there would be a lot less donuts being produced, maybe 50 dozen, and then that would imply for the supply curve for munchkins that there would be a leftward shift of the supply curve of munchkins.